There are secrets that age you from the inside out, and I've been carrying mine for 30 years. My name is John, I'm 55 years old, and I need to tell you about the winter I discovered what a Wendigo really eats. Not what the legends say. Not what the old Algonquian stories warn about. What I saw with my own eyes in the deep woods of Montana, where the snow falls so thick it erases the world. I was 25 that winter, young enough to think I understood the wilderness. I'd been working as a forest ranger for 3 years in the Bitterroot Range, living in a small cabin 12 miles from the nearest town. The isolation never bothered me. I preferred the company of pine trees and elk to people. My wife Sarah used to say I was half wild myself, the way I'd disappear into those mountains for weeks at a time. She was right, though I didn't see it then. I thought I was just doing my job, keeping watch over 100 square miles of federal land that most folks had forgotten existed. The cabin was simple. One room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, shelves of canned goods and dried meat. No electricity. No phone. Just me and the forest and the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I'd wake before dawn, check the weather, make my rounds. Looking for poachers, checking trail conditions, monitoring the wildlife. It was honest work. Clean work. The kind that lets a man sleep at night. December came hard that year. The temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Snow fell for 11 straight days, piling up past my windows, turning the forest into a cathedral of white. I remember the sound it made when it fell. Not silence exactly, but something close to it. A whisper. Like the earth was telling secrets to itself. I'd been out checking the northern boundary line when I first saw the tracks. They were wrong. That's the only word for it. Too large for a bear. Too elongated for a moose. The stride length was impossible. 15 feet between prints. And the claws. God, the claws had dug into the frozen earth like stakes. I followed them for a quarter mile before the fear set in properly. The tracks led to a small clearing where something had been feeding. Deer remains, but not torn apart the way a cougar or wolf would do it. These bones were stacked. Arranged. Almost methodical. I should have turned back. Any reasonable person would have. But I'd spent 3 years in those mountains thinking I knew every creature that walked, flew, or crawled through them. Pride makes you stupid. I kept following the tracks as the daylight began to fail, and that's when I heard it. A sound like wind through a canyon, but there was no wind. A sound like grief and hunger braided together. It came from everywhere and nowhere, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run. I didn't run. I stood there in the gathering dark, my rifle suddenly feeling like a child's toy in my hands, and I watched as it emerged from between the trees. Tall. Christ, it was tall. 9 feet, maybe more. Its body was emaciated, ribs showing through gray-white skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Antlers sprouted from its skull, not deer antlers, but something twisted and wrong, reaching toward the sky like dead branches. Its face was elongated, almost skull-like, with eyes that reflected the dying light the way an animal's do. But it was the way it moved that paralyzed me. Fluid. Careful. Intelligent. This wasn't some mindless beast. I could see thought behind those eyes. I could see it analyzing me, deciding whether I was prey or something else. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. My finger on the rifle trigger. Its massive frame swaying slightly, like a tree in a breeze that didn't exist. Then it made a sound. Not the grief wind I'd heard before. Something softer. Almost curious. And it turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest as silently as it had come. I stood there until full dark, shaking so hard my teeth rattled, trying to understand what I'd just seen, trying to fit it into the rational world I thought I lived in. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the stove with every lamp lit, my rifle across my knees, listening to the cabin creak and settle, listening to the forest. And sometime around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. That sound. Closer now. Just outside my walls. I could hear its breathing. Slow. Steady. Patient. It stayed there until dawn, and I stayed awake, and neither of us moved. When the sun finally rose, I found its tracks circling my cabin. Perfect circles. Like it had been keeping watch. Like it had been studying me the same way I'd studied it. That's when I understood. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was the beginning of something. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about the world. About monsters. About what it means to be human in a place where humanity ends and wilderness begins. The Wendigo had found me, and for reasons I couldn't yet understand, it had decided not to kill me. Not yet. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. I should have reported what I'd seen. Called it in to headquarters. Let the authorities handle it. But who would believe me? A Wendigo. A creature from Native American mythology, standing in the Montana snow like it had stepped out of a campfire story. They'd think I'd gone stir-crazy from the isolation. They'd pull me off the mountain and put me behind a desk, or worse, in front of a psychiatrist. So I kept quiet. And I kept watching. The creature came back every few nights, always after dark, always staying just at the edge of the clearing around my cabin. I started leaving food out. Deer meat from my own hunts. It never touched it. I tried raw beef from my stores. It ignored that too. Elk. Rabbit. Fish from the frozen stream. Nothing. The food would sit there until the scavengers took it. The Wendigo would watch from the trees, those impossible eyes reflecting my lamplight, but it never came closer and it never fed. I became obsessed. I started reading everything I could find about Wendigos. The old accounts said they were cannibals. Humans who'd eaten human flesh and transformed into monsters with an insatiable hunger. Always starving, never satisfied, consuming everything in their path. But this creature wasn't behaving like that. It wasn't hunting the nearby towns. Wasn't attacking the winter hikers who occasionally passed through. It was just existing. Watching. Waiting. 3 months into our strange standoff, I made a decision that changed everything. I'd shot a deer that afternoon, a clean kill, and I was field dressing it when I realized I wasn't alone. The Wendigo was standing about 40 yards away, motionless as always. But this time something was different. It wasn't watching me with curiosity. It was watching me with something that looked almost like longing. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the loneliness. 3 months of living with this secret was eating me alive. Sarah had stopped visiting because the roads were too dangerous. I hadn't spoken to another human being in weeks. So I did something insane. I called out to it. "Are you hungry?" My voice sounded strange in the winter air. Small. The Wendigo tilted its head, and for the first time it took a step toward me. I should have run. Instead, I cut a piece of meat from the deer and held it out. The creature approached slowly, each step deliberate, until it was close enough that I could smell it. Pine and ice and something else, something ancient. It reached out one long clawed hand, and I saw that hand was shaking. Not with aggression. With restraint. With effort. It took the meat from my hand, our fingers almost touching, and I saw something in its eyes that made my breath catch. Sadness. This thing that shouldn't exist, this monster from legend, looked profoundly, unbearably sad. But it didn't eat the meat. It held it for a moment, then gently placed it on the snow between us. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, leaving me standing there with a dead deer and more questions than before. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. About the restraint I'd seen. About the sadness. The answer came 3 weeks later, on one of the coldest nights of the year. I was running low on firewood and had to venture out to the woodshed behind my cabin. The temperature had dropped to 30 below. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The Wendigo was at the edge of the clearing, and it was struggling. Its movements were slow, labored. It kept trying to reach something on the ground, but its body was convulsing, fighting against itself. I approached carefully, and that's when I understood. There was an injured fox caught in an old trap someone had abandoned. The Wendigo was trying to free it. But every time it got close, its body would seize up, its jaw would open involuntarily, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It was fighting its own nature. Fighting the hunger. And it was losing. I ran forward without thinking and sprang the trap. The fox limped away into the darkness. The Wendigo collapsed to its knees in the snow, its whole body shaking. And that's when it looked at me, and I finally understood everything. This creature didn't hunt because it chose not to. It was fighting against what it was with every moment of its existence. The legends were right about the hunger, but they were wrong about the feeding. This Wendigo was starving itself, refusing to give in, and the effort was destroying it. I started bringing it food every night after that. Not meat. That was the shocking truth. What a Wendigo really eats, what keeps it from becoming the monster of legend, it's not flesh. It's companionship. It's recognition. It's being seen not as a thing of horror, but as something worthy of existence. I would sit at the edge of the clearing and talk to it. About my day. About the forest. About nothing and everything. And slowly, over the months, I watched it change. Become calmer. More present. The convulsions came less frequently. The sadness in its eyes began to fade. I was saving its life by seeing it as more than a monster. But I was also crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And there were others in those mountains who wouldn't understand. Who saw only the danger. The threat. Who believed some things shouldn't be allowed to exist, no matter how hard they fought against their nature. Spring came late that year. The snow finally melted in mid-April, revealing the forest floor and with it, a problem I'd been too focused on my secret to notice. Other people had been in the mountains. Hikers had found remains. Not from the Wendigo, it hadn't killed anything all winter. But from natural deaths. Old elk. A moose that had fallen through ice. The wolves and cougars had been feeding well. But people started asking questions. Started wondering what predator could strip bones so efficiently. Sarah came up in May. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. She said I looked different. Thinner. Older. My eyes had changed, she said. Like I'd seen something that had altered me fundamentally. She wasn't wrong. I tried to act normal, to be the husband she remembered. But how do you have small talk about the weather when you've been spending your nights sitting in the cold with a creature that shouldn't exist, watching it fight against its own mythology? She knew something was wrong. Kept pressing me. What was I hiding? Was there another woman? I almost laughed at that. If only it were that simple. How do you tell your wife that you've formed a bond with something out of nightmare? That you understand it in ways you've never understood another human being? That you've seen it weep, actual tears freezing on its skeletal face, because it's so grateful to not be alone in its struggle? I couldn't tell her. So I lied. Said I was fine. Said the isolation was getting to me, but I'd be okay. She left 2 days later, and I knew from the way she looked at me that our marriage was already over. I'd chosen the Wendigo over her without even realizing it. Some betrayals don't need to be spoken to be understood. June brought the hunters. A group from out of state who'd gotten a permit for the area. They were tracking what they thought was a bear. I knew better. I tried to warn them off, told them there was nothing worth hunting in this section. But they'd seen the tracks. Massive tracks. The kind that made men feel small and want to prove they weren't. The kind that made them stupid and brave in equal measure. I found them 3 days into their hunt. They'd set up camp near the northern ridge, and they'd seen it. The Wendigo. They were terrified and excited in that particular way men get when they think they've found something legendary. They were going to kill it. Mount its head in some lodge somewhere. Tell stories about the monster they'd conquered. I tried to stop them. Tried to explain. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. That night, I broke every rule I'd ever lived by. I went to the Wendigo's territory and I warned it. It was the first time I'd ever gone looking for it instead of waiting for it to come to me. I found it near the stream where we'd first started our strange companionship. It looked at me and somehow, impossibly, it understood. It saw the fear in my eyes and knew what it meant. Danger. Humans. Guns. What happened next I've never told anyone. The Wendigo could have run. Could have disappeared into the deep wilderness where no hunter would dare follow. Instead, it came closer to me than it ever had before, close enough that I could have touched its face. And it made a sound, that grief wind sound, but different this time. Gratitude. Goodbye. It knew what I was giving up by warning it. Knew that by choosing its life over human law, I was ending my own life as I knew it. It left that night. I never saw it again. The hunters found nothing but old tracks. They went home disappointed but alive. I turned in my resignation the next week. Couldn't explain why, just said the mountains weren't for me anymore. Sarah filed for divorce 2 months later. I didn't fight it. How could I? I'd already left our marriage long before she made it official. That was 30 years ago. I live in town now. Work at a hardware store. Have a small apartment. A simple life. People who know me think I'm just another middle-aged man who washed out of the Park Service. They don't know that sometimes on the coldest winter nights, I drive out to the edge of those mountains and I listen, hoping to hear that wind through canyon sound, hoping to know it's still out there, still fighting against what it was born to be. Here's what I learned, what I need you to understand. The real horror isn't that monsters exist. It's that we've trained ourselves to see only the monster and never the struggle. That Wendigo was starving itself to death rather than become what legend said it had to be. It was choosing suffering over surrender, isolation over violence. And what it needed to survive wasn't blood or flesh, it was witness. It needed someone to see its fight and recognize it as valuable, as worthy. We're all fighting against something we were told we have to be. We're all starving ourselves of something we need because we're afraid of what people will think. The Wendigo taught me that the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be the monster everyone expects, even when that refusal costs you everything. Even when you have to do it alone. Even when the hunger never stops. I'm 55 years old now. I've kept this secret for 30 years. Let it cost me my marriage, my career, my place in the world. But I'd do it all again. Because for one winter, in the deepest part of the Montana wilderness, I learned what a Wendigo really eats. Not human flesh. Not violence. But hope. The hope that someone, somewhere, will see beyond the teeth and the claws and the legend to the choice being made underneath. The daily, impossible choice to be something better than what you were made to be. That's the secret. That's what will shock you. Not how monstrous it was, but how human. Thanks for following the story. If you can, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps YouTube share our content with more people. Also, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. That way we'll know where our viewers are from. Check out the other stories too. See you next time. Bye.